Mr. Chairman, there are 15 ayes and 24 noes.
The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any further amendments to the amendment in nature of a substitute?
Move to strike the.
For what purpose does Mr. Roy seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
I haven't had a chance to talk on the underlying, and I just wanted to revisit, especially in light of the comments of Mr. Neguse, which I'm sorry to disappoint in terms of the point I was making. But on this point about spending, I mean, because it's actually important, because we're talking about, what is it, $2 million? I don't remember what the dollar amount is here. It's not an enormous sum compared to the enormity of our federal government spending. But the reason I wanted to highlight it and bring it up is, I think it was the gentlelady from Texas who said something to the effect of, and I'm paraphrasing because I was walking down the hall, it's not a direct quote, about our state, our shared state in Texas, or any state, not necessarily being able to do these things, or something in that kind of zip code. And my only point is, sitting here as we are $30.5 trillion in debt, and regardless of which side of the aisle we're on, if we're in the majority or not, we just keep making programs and we just keep doing things as if we have an unlimited pile of money, because that's how we treat it. And it is something that I try to point out on the floor. It's something I try to point out in committee, but it matters, because even something that seems like, well, good grief, man, what are you getting hung up on $2 million for a program here that's trying to create something to coordinate? Because everything we do is going, oh, let's create a grant program. Let's just go do some money through the DOJ. And the notion here on this one, I hear my colleagues on the side of the aisle saying, well, this is just to coordinate. It'll just help gap fill, I suppose, for a state that doesn't have the resources and can't do it. But in terms of, we're talking about Texas, we're talking about a state whose GDP, the last time I checked, was $1.83 trillion. Like, the state of Texas budget for the 21-22 or 22-23 cycle is $264 billion. Now, some people might disagree with the state of Texas, and Governor Abbott, for example, in the legislature passed $3 billion to go secure the border, and to have Department of Public Safety, Texas troopers having to go down and gap fill and backstop Border Patrol when we're not actually doing the job of securing the border. I realize my colleagues on the other side of the aisle disagree with that. But my point is just, and it goes back to a little bit of what I think Mr. Neguse's complaints were about Mr. Johnson, getting off track in I think his words and framing, about talking about our accusations of defunding the police, and going down a laundry list of our views of the fact that we think colleagues on the other side of the aisle and Democrats across the country have sought to defund the police. I think that's fairly factually evident, but okay, taking the gentleman on his point, my point is that we've got a committee here and a body that is saying, we're gonna go solve a problem. We're gonna go give $2 million to DOJ, and they're gonna go hire a coordinator, and that coordinator's gonna get together, they're gonna coordinate, and then that'll help us get the active shooter alert. But then we're saying Texas can't do it. But then the gentleman who's now in the chair said, oh, but don't worry, Texas did it. They did it already. And it's to the point of, one of my colleagues said, well, I think it might have been Mr. Gates, so why are we doing this? And I think we don't ask that question enough, right? It is the response to do something, which I understand. I understand the impulse. Uvalde is just a few miles out of the district that I represent, and I know the people there well. I understand the impulse, but we do this all the time in response. I would even argue a little bit on the court bill, which I voted for, right? We go, boom, we need to go do something. Let's do something on the court. Then there was a debate about staff, well, then staff's families. Well, how far do we go? Well, what does that cost? Well, do we do that for all the circuit courts? Do we do that for all the district courts? Do we do that for all Congress? Right? We get crazy people threaten us on both sides of the aisle all the time, right? Does Capitol Police roll down to Texas or to any one of my colleagues' states? My point is just, we have to have some limiting principle. If we don't have a limiting principle, how on earth can we make tough choices? And we don't have a single limiting principle here anymore at all. We don't ever sit down on the floor. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle will say, well, raise taxes. We ain't gonna raise enough taxes to make up $1 trillion and whatever dollars a year deficit. I say, well, that's fine, let's just keep racking up deficit. And I hope everybody understands I'm a pretty equal opportunity basher of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle on the spending front, and have done so repeatedly on the floor. But I bring it up on something as seemingly small and not controversial in my colleagues on the other side of the aisle's opinion, on something small as $2 million and something that's just coordinating among states, because I think it actually is example of the problem. Introduce a bill. This sounds good. Active shooter alert. Let's just do that. What's another $2 million and what's another person hired at the Department of Justice? But this is what we do all the time. This is what we do every day in this body. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Are there any, yes, who seeks recognition?
Me.
For what purpose you seek recognition, Mr. Biggs?
I'm Bishop.
Mr. Bishop, I'm sorry.
To strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
You know, we just had the vote on the amendment, and